All right, we'll start the Finance Committee meeting. First issue we're going to take up, we're going to hear from our friends at Department of Revenue in just a minute, but we're going to have a bill before us later on that is a Mississippi-Ireland Trade Commission. A lot of countries are starting to go directly to states just due to the inaction in Washington. So countries are starting to become more active in going directly to states to create trade commissions for economic activities and educational opportunities. We will have a bill like that before us here in the coming week or so. But while he is here, and I'll use my Southern Gaelic to pronounce this, the Cathaoirleach Shinadaran, the 24th chair of the Senate of Ireland, Senator Mark Daly, is with us today, and he's going to give us a little bit more detail about the economic activities in Ireland, and not specifically on the bill, but just talk about the situation in Ireland and what's kind of what's available and some of the things that are going on with other states across the country that have entered into these types of trade commissions. So, Senator, if you want to come up to the speaker there and just kind of give us an economic update on Ireland.
Thank you. Cathaoirleach would be the title of yourself as chair of this committee, but it's a great honor to be here today. The guy who was voted by the people of Ireland in 2016 on the 100th anniversary of the 1916 Rising wasn't a leader of the Rising or someone who was involved directly with the struggle for independence. He was an official at the Department of Finance. He also ended up as a senator, but in the 1950s, he wrote a memo to the Finance Secretary, the Secretary of the Treasury in Ireland. And he said that things are so bad that we should seriously consider joining the United Kingdom again after fighting for 700 years to leave them, because our economic outlook was dire. We had 1,000 people a week leaving the country. But he did, like a good official, say, however, we have an idea. And the idea he had was called the Programme for Economic Recovery. His name was T.K. Whitaker. And T.K. Whitaker said that we need to join the European Union and get benefit out of accessing a market, which at the time was 11 countries. It took a number of decades to eventually get into the European Union because we had to join with our largest trading partner at the time, which was the United Kingdom, where 90% of all our product was sold to. And it did not have much added value because most of it was agricultural product at the time. But by joining the European Union and then focusing on foreign direct investment, we were able to attract companies to Ireland. And over time, because we're a small country and a small state like Mississippi, you have to be scrappy, you have to fight, and you have to be flexible and maneuverable, but you can also access people a lot easier than you can in other bigger countries. So when people came from Apple to other countries with an offer of 200 jobs, well, the governments in other countries weren't paying attention and particularly didn't care for 200 jobs, but we cared. They now employ over 3,000 people in County Cork. Intel similarly came with an idea for a small manufacturing plant in Kildare. They now employ 6,000 people in Cork. So we are a gateway to the European Union. As was pointed out earlier, Brexit has had the unfortunate consequence for our nearest neighbour that a lot of their big companies are leaving England and going to other European countries. The Bank of London has moved from London to Dublin and has moved 350 million of assets out of London to Ireland. And similarly, there are other tales of the long-term consequences of leaving your largest trading partner. Well, if it ends well, it'll be a surprise to everybody. In the history of bad ideas, leaving your largest trading partner probably wasn't the worst idea, but it was pretty close to the worst idea you could ever have. So the idea of Ireland as a gateway to Europe for other states and other countries is well founded over this idea of the Economic Programme for Recovery in 1956 by T.K. Whitaker, which has led to Ireland being one of the most advanced economies in Europe. Over 70% of our high school graduates end up going to some form of third level education. We have an attractive taxation policy with corporations, and we look forward to continuing to invest in our educational community and our universities. because we don't have natural resources. Our natural resources are our people. And as many of your members here would have found out, they're pretty friendly. We like to welcome people to Ireland, and we like to bring it to Northern Ireland to show them the importance of the US investment in Northern Ireland as well for the peace process. But we are also the 9th largest investor in the United States of America. And many countries look at going to the top 10, the Californias, the New Yorks, and they're kind of jaded from everybody coming to them. But I believe that I think going to other states and seeing other opportunities and partnering on areas of common interest can benefit us all, and explain how, although having a base in Ireland where 950 US companies already have a base, where there is an American Ireland Chamber of Commerce that has long established in terms of providing support and understanding on what to do and what not to do when accessing the European Union market through Ireland, that you are able to advance the cause of Mississippi and Ireland through economic partnership, educational partnership, and friendship, such as we have with Mississippi. So Chairman Cathaoirleach, thank you very much for this great honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Do any members have any questions for our guest? Okay, you're going to skate out, so thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chairman.
Appreciate you taking time to stop by. And now we will go to, how do you say commissioner in Gaelic? Commissioner Chris Graham with the Department of Revenue. I know he's going to have an accent too, but hopefully y'all can understand him. Glad to have you here today. Look forward to your remarks.
Mine is nothing as eloquent as the previous speaker. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for having us here. We do have a handout that we're passing out as well. It's a little longer. I don't really plan on going through the entire handout. I joined the Department of Revenue in July of 2020, which was really kind of in the middle of the craziness of the pandemic. If y'all will recall back in July of 2020, what things were like. I've been there now 3.5 years. When I joined the commission, the department, I had, there was a 2-year term left from the former commissioner. I've now been appointed to a 6-year term, and I'm a year and a half into that term. And so hopefully I'm around for 4.5 more years. What I can tell you about the last 3.5 years at the department, we've been through a whole lot, quite a few legislative changes that have affected us. And it seems like every year, I think we had 80 or so bills that affected us directly last year. And we spent about half of our year not recovering, but adjusting to things, because every time you all make a change to the tax laws, make a change to a tag, there's a lot of programming that goes on in the background. And so we're really interested in what this committee does and what the legislature does in general. The handout I've given you, the first couple of pages are not numbered, but then the remainder pages after the first 3 are numbered. The pages that have numbers at the bottom of them come from our annual report. I didn't bring the entire annual report. It's way too long to cover in a meeting like this, but it is available on our website. And so I've tried to take a couple of pages I thought you all might be mostly interested in out of our annual report. And a couple of things I just wanted to cover on the front end. Having worked here at the Legislative Budget Office, primarily in the Senate as a Senate budget officer, I knew what all the Department of Revenue did before I started working there. But when I went and actually started working at the Department of Revenue, one of the things that really surprised me was how many taxpayers we come into contact with on a daily basis. And it is a taxpayer-facing organization. Everything we do generally has a taxpayer customer on the other end. And there are a couple of stats I just wanted to share with you. Our main customer service line that we use to take in calls, it's not our only customer service line, but it's like our main line that we use for most of our calls. We answered 570,000 calls in fiscal year 2023. We took in our Clinton office almost 20,000 walk-in customers. Most of those had some type of title issue. We also have an office open to the public in North Mississippi, one on the coast, one in Hattiesburg, and we take walk-in customers in all of those offices. As far as processing goes, we processed 3.9 million tax returns in FY 2023. So that represents a taxpayer filing a document with the Department of Revenue, and it's part of how they pay what's owed to the state. Out of those 3.9 million tax returns, about 2.6 million of those were filed electronically, which is great. And so we spend a whole lot of money on our computer system so that we can have the technology able to accept things electronically. But we still receive about 1.3 million paper filed returns. And you can imagine the enormous burden it is to take that paper, get it into our system. The chances for errors when you take things in manually like that are really high. It's very labor intensive. It's very costly for the equipment that we use to scan that information in. And so I think that's an opportunity for the department as we go forward, is to continue to push our electronic filing capabilities and have more taxpayers actually file electronically. That's something that we are ahead of a lot of other states on. A lot of states stats are a lot lower as far as electronic file things. And so we do well, but that's an area we could probably save the state a lot of money and a lot of errors that are made through the manual process of scanning a document and getting the information in. Another part of our department that's really taxpayer facing is our audit staff. Our audit staff conducted almost 5,000 audits last year of taxpayers. And of those 5,000, it's 4,700, I think is the number. Of those 4,700 audits, that resulted in assessments of $45 million. And so those are assessments that ultimately will result in some money coming into the state. In addition to our audit staff doing audits and helping taxpayers comply with the law, we also have a collection staff. And so once a liability is assessed and you utilize all of your appeal process, it becomes a final liability. And so once it's a final liability, you actually owe money to the state. And we have a group of people whose job is to go around the state and try to collect money that's finally determined to be due to the state. And last year, those individuals made 56,000 site visits across the state. All parts of the state, they work out in the field primarily, and they collected $161 million last year. And so they're vitally important to revenue collection for the state. Another area that we end up dealing with the public quite a bit is on property and homestead issues. And so all the homestead applications get submitted to the Department of Revenue. Luckily, that's all submitted electronically, and we can do most of the checks that we have to do on the homestead side of things electronically. And so the counties are connected into our computer system, and we primarily check those for income tax liabilities, or maybe where there's a homestead in multiple locations. And so we check those people for qualifications. So we checked 675,000 of those last year as well. Motor vehicles is another one that we do a lot and interact a lot with taxpayers on. We issued almost 900,000 titles last year. And so that's individuals who've gotten a title for whether they bought a new car, whether they've sold a car, salvaged a car. We issue titles related to all those transactions. And that's another area where we accept a lot of paper right now. And you all were kind enough last session to pass a bill that allows us to convert some of that to electronic. And we're in the process of trying to make that process more electronic. And so the first thing that we think we will do is have an electronic lien system. And the way electronic lien system works is when you go in, let's just say you go into a car dealership to buy a car and you're financing it, you would have a lien holder placed on your title at that point. So that application comes to the Department of Revenue. We process that application and then we mail a title to the lien holder, and I assume they put it in a file somewhere. And then if you pay your loan off, they'll sign the front of your title saying you have satisfied your lien, and then they will mail it to you and you'll stick it in a file folder and not ever be able to find it again. And we spent a lot of time trying to chase down liens that have been actually paid off, but the taxpayer doesn't know what they did with their title, or perhaps they never even received the title. And we think an electronic system will allow that to be a much more efficient way for us to remove titles off of cars. And so if that's an electronic process, the way it would work theoretically, I think, is once you pay off your lien, it was sent to the lien holder to start with electronically. They then notify the department the lien is paid off, and then we can mail the title to the actual to the customer. Because sometimes people will keep their car 10 or 15 years and they won't know where their title is, and the person who loaned them the money is no longer in business. And so sometimes it's hard to find a lien holder to release the lien. And so that we think that'll be a good tool for us to get liens released efficiently. And you all passed a bill last year that specifically allows us to do that. The other thing that we do with motor vehicles is we help the counties issue tags. We do issue some tags out of our office, but most of the tags are county tags that get issued by the county offices. We help the counties actually maintain their inventory of tags. And so working with the counties last year, all 82 counties, we issued well over 3 million tags last year. And the other thing I wanted to say about tags is you all passed a bill 2 sessions ago to approve a blackout personalized tag. I think y'all will remember that bill. And you pay an extra $50, you get a personalized tag. It's a blackout tag. The 38 or so of that $50 goes to a law enforcement and firefighters death benefit trust fund. That tag has been widely popular. And as of June 30th of this year, I think we had sold over 107,000. The number's gone up a good bit since then. And so that's been a wildly, yes, sir.
Didn't we pass a version where you could get regular lettering? It's not a vanity plate?
You did. That's the next thing I was going to mention.
Okay.
So 2 sessions ago, you passed a bill where you could get a blackout tag, but it had to be a personalized tag. And so there's also a law that says the state, the Department of Revenue and the License Tag Commission every 5 years has to issue a new state issue tag. So before I talk about the blackout tag, we approved a new state issued standard plate that started going out in January. And so that standard issue plate, instead of the yellow, kind of the yellow colored plate that you have now, you'll start seeing a white background plate with a blue magnolia in the middle of it. So that'll be the new standard issue plate. Last session, you all passed a bill that also allowed taxpayers to choose to have a blackout standard issue plate. And that started being issued in January too. And we've already had quite a few of those orders. The tricky part for us on that is we help the counties maintain their inventory of those plates. It's really the county's responsibility to maintain inventories. We do the ordering whenever they need plates, but now they have to manage 2 types of inventory. And but we do expect the blackout tag to be very popular. And so far, 3 weeks into the new year, it looks like the standard issue blackout tag is going to be very popular. And just like the personalized tag, there's an extra $50 that gets paid, and I think it's 38 or so of that goes to the law enforcement officers and firefighters death benefit trust.
Do you have a total of how much has been accumulated in that trust?
I do.
It's policies.
There's a June 30th number in my handout, and I can point it out in just a second.
That's fine.
It's several $1 million that has been put into the fund as of now. I think it was in the $3 million range of what's been deposited so far since the inception. But I think it is in my materials. I can cover it. So in addition to all these other things, we also serve as the wholesale distributor of alcoholic beverages in the state of Mississippi. We also regulate permittees. We have just less than 700 package stores and about 1,400 on-premise locations that we're responsible for licensing and regulating. And so one of the updates I wanted to give you about that is 2 sessions ago, you all passed a bill that authorized us to contract with a private operator to run our warehouse that houses all of the alcohol. And so we have done that. In July of 2022, that bill went into effect. We went through the process of doing an RFP, putting an RFP out, and by December, we had selected an operator out of the 4 operators, the potential operators who had responded. That operator, then we had to go to PPRB and have that approved. I think we had that approved in March of 2023. And as of June of 2023, that operator has taken over the operations inside the warehouse. So as liquor is being shipped now, before that contract, it was all state employees and completely state managed and state run. And when you all passed a bill that authorized us to contract with a private company. And so now it's a private company that's responsible for managing the warehouse shipping operations. They started June the 19th. They've been in place about 6 months. They've made a tremendous number of improvements. And as I've talked to this committee in the past, and then we've had some study committees that I've been on in the past as well, for years, we've known that we needed a new warehouse. The second part of the bill that y'all passed 2 sessions ago also authorized us to build a new warehouse. And the bill contemplated that we would hire an operator first. We would then consult with the operator and use the operator's input to help us with an RFP to construct a warehouse. And that's where we are right now with the warehouses. We're working on an RFP to put out for bid. Hopefully in the next 2 months, we'll have an RFP out that will then in short order be responded to by whomever is interested in constructing a warehouse, which will then let us start the process of actually building a warehouse. And one of the asks that we will have of you all this year is to increase the amount of funding that you all have provided for that. I think you gave us $55 million when you approved the bill, and we're anticipating we're going to need more than that. We're currently working with consultants to help us come up with a really good number for you guys as far as the final cost anticipated on that warehouse, and would expect to come back to you all this session and ask for additional money related to the warehouse.
You mind real quick, touch on, I know, several members would like to hear kind of the improvements that have been made around delivery, where you were, maybe how challenging it got, and then where you are today.
So for 7, 8, 9 years, and I've not been at the department that long, but for 7 or 8 or 9 years, the department has talked about needing a new warehouse. The warehouse is 40 years old. The equipment that they're currently operating, there's a conveyor system and some other equipment that's well past its life expectancy. And so we've known for a while that we would have to do something related to the warehouse. Then the pandemic came along. And so if you go back and look at the history of us selling alcohol in the state of Mississippi, it's kind of like our revenues. Pandemic came along, people started making money and drinking. And really our demand outpaced what we're able to do in the current warehouse. And so the problems we had in the warehouse that were already there for 7 or 8 years before, all of a sudden were exacerbated, and we were at a position where we couldn't meet the demand. And in the midst of all that, we came to you all, and it took us a little bit more than a session, but you all passed a bill that let us build a warehouse. Well, we knew from the time that you passed a bill to the time we had a new operator coming in that it was going to be a struggle for us to continue operating out of the warehouse, because what employees hear whenever you tell them there's a new company coming in that's going to be running the warehouse, most of those employees hear, I'm about to lose my job. It doesn't matter how many times you tell them, no, if you want a job, you will be considered by the operator. You show up and do your work, they will hire you, because they're not bringing in everybody new from outside. Well, that's a hard message to deliver to people who really are only hearing, hey, I'm going to lose my job. And so from the time the bill passed July 1st until June of the next year, we had a hard time keeping normal operations. And so at times it was really a struggle. And then and I don't want to use COVID as an excuse, but you add on top of that, the regular employee problems folks are having as a result of the pandemic. So we kind of had the double whammy. And so we worked really hard to try to keep things going. And when the operator took over, they had a tremendous backlog of cases that had been ordered, but had not been shipped. And so when they came in, there was a 3 or 4 week delay on getting product from the time it's ordered to the time it's shipped. And so immediately they started working on, well, first, and we knew they would do this, first they came in and wanted to train everybody the way they do things, the way their culture works, the way their people work, safety, all the things that they needed to start installing their culture, which I agree with 100%. Well, the result of that is they weren't doing quite the output that we were doing when they first took over, but that was so that they could get things going and get things running the way that they saw them running. And it took them a couple of months, and we knew it would. So 90 days in, things didn't get better. They got a little worse because they were being deliberate about how they did things. But now, instead of like a 3 or 4 week delay, they're within a week of shipping. And the contract requires them to get the next day shipping. So if you order something on one day, within 2 days, you ought to be receiving a delivery of that product. And that's what they're on pace to do. But because they started with such a backlog, they've been having to ship more than's actually being ordered. And they've whittled that down to just within about a week right now. It varies from week to week. And so they've made tremendous improvements. There's still a lot of things that they need to improve and that they're working to improve. But it's not all going to change overnight, and they are moving in the right direction. And we knew that they would. They're just going to need some time to make sure they get things operating the way they want to operate them. And then at the end of the day, they're still in that 40-year-old building, and the ultimate goal is to put them in a building that they can really operate out of, and not in the dilapidated building that we're in. And so that's what you all have put into place for us to do, and we're probably just going to need a little additional funding to make sure we're able to get in it. Did that address your question on that? Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention very briefly is we're also in the business of regulating cannabis, medical cannabis dispensaries. And so we work with the Department of Health. The Department of Health has primary responsibility for operating the medical cannabis program. We actually license and regulate the medical cannabis dispensaries. And as of, I think last week, there were about 210 dispensaries statewide. They're not all in business currently. There's less than 150, I think, actively selling product in the state, but there are a number that are also currently have licenses who have not quite yet opened up. That's been y'all aren't the appropriations committee, but the appropriations committee was really good to us by giving us some additional funding to make sure that we could hire the employees that we needed to cover the medical cannabis program, and we were able to do that. We were able to buy some equipment because of some appropriations that the appropriations committee gave us in addition once we passed the medical cannabis program, and so we've been able to staff up and get our equipment right for that. And from our perspective, that program is operating as from a medical cannabis dispensary perspective as you all intended for it to at this point. So if there are any other questions, I'll be happy to go through just a couple of revenue numbers. I don't want to keep y'all too long, but I wanted to cover just a couple of revenue things, if that's okay.
For the new members especially, but yes, absolutely, please. And I'll open up for any questions members may have.
Okay. So the next 2 pages, as I said earlier, of your handout are revenue numbers that they don't have any page numbers at the bottom. They're pie charts. And after that, the pages actually start to be numbered. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, and I'll spend as much time as you want. But as far as revenue goes, I like this first pie chart. It shows you the entire amount that the Department of Revenue collects. And so there are other agencies that collect money as well that aren't included in these numbers. The primary one that affects the general fund is the Department of Finance and Administration. They collect between $200 and $300 million a year that goes to the general fund. And so when I'm showing you these numbers, these don't include the Department of Finance and Administration's numbers. These are only the Department of Revenue numbers. These are the things that we're responsible for collecting. And then we then send that money where the legislature has directed us to send that money. And that's why I like this chart, is because it shows you a breakdown of the money that we collect. It shows you that we collected about $10.8 billion last year. And of that $10.8 billion, this list I have below here shows you where the legislature has directed us to send that money. I like this chart because it really shows some of the priorities of the legislature. Now, this is not money that's appropriated. The appropriations process is a little bit different. But this is money that y'all have sent particular places for particular types of uses. And the thing I like about this is it shows our general fund, we collected $7.4 billion. And then we have the rest of them ordered in numerical order, the highest being the top. And so this report here shows that you all have really sent a lot of money to municipalities. And I'll show you in just a minute that has increased over the last 4 years tremendously. You also, so for every dollar we collect, we send a good chunk of it to transportation. Now, that's not saying we send that to MDOT. There are a lot of things that support transportation other than MDOT, but a bunch of that goes to MDOT. We send some money to MDEQ. We send some money to State Aid Road and then some other agencies as well. So it gets spread out. It's not just MDOT that we send that money to. And that money for transportation, y'all sent $630 million to transportation purposes last year. That's primarily petroleum taxes and privilege taxes that go to there. The next line there is education. And so there's this thing called the Education Enhancement Fund. Y'all send a whole lot of money to the Education Enhancement Fund. Most of that is going to the EEF. And so that's money that comes off the top that goes directly to education that doesn't go through the general fund. Sometimes that gets overlooked in the appropriations process, is the tremendous amount of money that you all send to educational purposes that don't really come from the general fund. So there are other places that y'all are sending money that make it back to education. The other one I wanted to point out to you all is the ad valorem reduction fund. That's money generated off of car sales tax, automobile sales tax. There's also some use tax money in there. Y'all send that money back to the locals for the legislative tag credit. And so when I go in and buy my tag, I'm not paying what the county has actually assessed me. I'm getting a credit because the legislature sends money to the locals to help reduce the amount of my car tag. That's something I think that gets overlooked very routinely by taxpayers, is that, just say your tag was going to be $1,000, you may only be paying $400 or $500 for that tag, and the rest of that money is being shipped to the locals through this motor vehicle ad valorem reduction fund. And so that's if you ever look at your tag receipt, I think it still says legislative tag credit on it, and that's what that amount is from. The other is counties. That amount has also increased, and I'll show you all that in just 2 seconds. But the amount y'all send to counties last year was $311 million directly to counties. Now, that doesn't count all the money that y'all appropriated through the appropriations process. This is money that just goes out before the appropriations process starts. And so what I would tell you about this $7.4 billion in FY 2023, the regular appropriations were much less than $7.4 billion. So out of the general fund, y'all appropriated a lot less than $7.4 billion. And when the collections exceeded what y'all appropriated, that money comes into the state, and it usually goes to two places. It usually goes to the rainy day fund, and it usually goes to the capital expense fund. And so one of the reasons y'all been able to spend a lot of money locally is because you have been budgeting with your recurring expenses at a level lower than what your revenue has been coming in. And so you've had money left over at the end, which then in turn goes into the capital expense and rainy day fund. But the rainy day fund's almost full right now. So most of it is going to the capital expense fund for appropriation by the legislature. And so I think the finance committee probably has not borrowed money in a session or two. One of the reasons you all have not had to borrow money is because of the tremendous amount of money that you've had in capital expense funds. And so by continuing to budget fairly low and then your collections exceeding your budgeted levels, you're able to do some things on some one-time projects that you would either have to borrow money or forego doing. And so I think that's a really good effect of bringing in more than you're actually budgeting. The other thing I'd like to show you is if you flip to the next pie chart. So this is what the revenue collections look like in fiscal year 2019. The first pie chart is FY 2023. So in FY 2019, June 30th, 2019, y'all were going into elections to start a new 4-year term that January 2020, and you're kind of in the same position now. So I thought this was a good way to look. Okay, this was going into the previous 4 years. So back in 2019, the general fund collected $5.7 billion. And if you look at 2020, the general fund collected $7.4 billion. And you see there was just tremendous growth in the general fund over that 4 years, unprecedented growth. And I can tell you FY 2019 was a really good year. It was not a down year. So you weren't starting low, you were starting high. FY 20 took a little bit of a bump because of COVID. For 2 months, we had some COVID issues. And then after that, revenue just went through the roof for 3 years going now. And so the revenue continues to be strong this fiscal year. Yes, sir, Senator Jordan.
Yes, sir. Let him get through with this and I'll recognize you to ask a question. Let him get through with this real quick. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so the amount of growth that you saw from FY 20, really 2018, 2017 through 2023, and looks like it's continuing through 2024 is just unprecedented. It's been very strong. It's not showing much sign of slowing down. And the economy has just been really, from a tax perspective, rocking since that point.
Okay. All right, Senator Jordan for a question.
This is additional. I know this municipalities at one time was getting 18 or 19% of their tax money back. This is additional money that they are receiving.
The number I'm about to talk with you about on the municipalities, they still receive 18.5% from sales that occur inside of the municipalities. I'm about to point out right now the difference between 2019 and the 2023 number. Most of that growth, not all of it, but most of that growth is the result of some legislation you all passed back in 2018 in the special session that you all had. And so they still receive the 18.5%, and it is included in this number that you see here in front of you. About 500 million is what they received back in the 18.5% across all the municipalities last year, a little bit higher than 500 million, but that's included in this big number. Now, the amounts that y'all appropriated last year out of the capital expense fund, a lot of that went to municipalities, counties, all kinds of entities. That's additional, that's not included on this list. So this doesn't include any appropriated dollars. These are just dollars y'all send off the top off of sales tax collection and use tax collections.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Senator Sparks, you had a question?
I hope I didn't jump ahead, but when you were talking about ABC, you've got a page deeper in the packet that is talking about sales tax collected in fiscal year 22 was around 35 million, and fiscal year 23 it was 1 million. Is that because the third party vendor is collecting and it's not flowing through DOR?
No, sir. You all passed a bill in the 22 session and then in the 23 session. So that tax number that you see was a wholesale tax that we charged. And so Senator Johnson, I think, handled both of those bills. Y'all did away with the wholesale tax. So the way it used to work is when we sold it to package stores or permittees, there would be a wholesale tax. They would then sell it at retail. There's a retail tax, and then they would get a credit for the wholesale tax. We've eliminated the middle part, which is the wholesale tax. So now when it goes to the permittees, they sell it, they charge the retail sales tax rate on what they sell it at, and they don't get a credit because they haven't paid any wholesale sales tax. So y'all eliminated the wholesale sales tax. So that number should show up in the sales tax numbers in general now.
Okay, so it would show up in the general fund sales tax
Yes, sir.
instead of in your budget?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I did want to point out quickly, the municipalities number in 2019, you all sent $600 million to municipalities. Most of that was the 18.5% that they received from sales within the municipalities. In 2018, you had a special session where you passed a Infrastructure Modernization Act. You also passed a use tax modernization piece when you did that, and you decided that you would send use tax money to counties, municipalities, and the local system bridge program, I think is the name of the program. And so now with use taxes, if you turn to the 2023 number, you sent $881 million to municipalities, up from 601. So that's an additional 281 million. And to counties, you sent $311 million to counties. And before the use tax modernization, you sent 155 million to counties. So it almost doubled the amount of money that the counties were receiving. And so they're getting that from sales tax, and they're getting that from use tax. And I have a sheet. I'm not going to put y'all to sleep by covering it all. But if you look at the use tax numbers, the other thing you all did on the use tax is you passed the Marketplace Facilitator Act several years ago now. And what the Marketplace Facilitator Act says, if you're a marketplace facilitator that facilitates people selling things on your platform, you have to collect tax and remit it to the state. And so really the growth in use tax year in and year out, we used to see use tax numbers of 300 million. And now that number is up to 800 million. And the growth in there primarily is because of the Marketplace Facilitator Act. Well, in the process of us collecting the 800 million, you are now giving more to municipalities and to counties. And so that's been I think a really big windfall. You do have some restrictions on them. I think they have to spend it on infrastructure needs. They can't just spend it on anything, which I think makes sense knowing what's going on in a lot of our towns and counties. That there are a lot of infrastructure needs, but that money I think has been well diverted to those purposes, but it shows a real commitment by the legislature to fund those things.
Real quick, Chris, if you don't mind, on homestead exemption, I know we passed a bill in the past. Would you talk about the mechanism that, I'm sure some of my colleagues have heard from their tax assessor and tax collector on kind of messing with the homestead exemption and when it can be applied and when retroactively, there's a cutoff date that we need to adhere to. I think there may be some legislation to try to fix some of this. But as far as the homestead exemption, can you explain why the cutoff date is necessary and counties can't go back and retroactively apply it to a year?
I may have to phone a friend to explain it. I've been to the meetings where they have explained it, but it becomes a problem after February 1st. And the way the counties settle out their monthly collections, there's not really a way to go back and retroactively apply it. And I would encourage you to seriously consider the bill that they're working on to try to correct the problem. It's a real administrative nightmare for them. And Jan might be able to provide a little bit more. She has not been in all the meetings. I've been in the meetings and I didn't bring my notes from those meetings, but it's definitely a local issue. It doesn't affect us as much, but it is a real effect on the counties trying to apply. They're having to assess these properties, and there's really not a good way to go back and change it after you've done it.
I think it speaks to a bill that we passed, giving an exemption on homestead and letting them go back and take it the year they bought it. And if they buy it after a certain date, I think we have to uniformly go forward, use it. Like if you do it, you'll get the credit the following year, but you'll have to pay the ad valorem tax that first year. And then the following year, they can get the exemption. But I don't think we can move forward. I think it's caused a lot of problems in county government giving a homestead exemption that they can instantaneously get credit for, and the county hadn't.
And I apologize, I didn't bring my notes on that, but it is a real problem for the locals to account for that and make it happen. And there's not a really good, simple one way to do it. There's multiple ways to do it, several of which I think could get them through an audit, but mechanically is very difficult for them to do.
Okay. Are there any questions for the commissioner? Senator Blunt for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner, for always being so responsive to us when we have questions about everything that goes on. And I know you've got a lot on your plate at DOR. You sent me some information a few days ago regarding the phase-in of the couple of tax cuts that have been passed in the last few years by the legislature, the phase-in of the corporate franchise tax cut and the phase-in of the income tax, which are not, neither of which is fully phased in today. Do you happen to recall, and I think I recall, what additional annual tax cuts have not yet taken place, and that I think they're both will fully phase in for FY 2025? Do you happen to recall that dollar amount?
I don't off the top of my head. I know that you all passed the Taxpayer Pay Raise Act. It might have been 2017, 2016. So the Taxpayer Pay Raise Act did a couple of things to income tax. It eliminated the 3% bracket.
Right.
It also did some things with the self-employment deduction, but it also phased out the corporate franchise tax over a number of years, which that's your tax on capital. And that, I think that phase out goes all the way to 2028, 2029. And we've estimated that's about $30 million a year that comes out of the general fund. There's also
$30 million, an additional $30 million each year, not $30 million, but $30 million more each year than it was the previous year.
That's correct. Yes, sir. So each year, and it could go up, or it's an estimate. It could go up, certainly could go down a little bit, but it's about $30 million a year. We updated that estimate. It was still pretty close to $30 million per year, not total. It's, you add it every year, it's another $30 million that reduces the general fund. Then you also passed the Tax Freedom Act 2 sessions ago. I think it was called the Tax Freedom Act, which, of course, the Taxpayer Pay Raise Act was the largest income tax cut, I believe, possibly in state history at the time it was passed. And then the Tax Freedom Act came along, and you've already eliminated the 3% bracket. It then eliminated the 4% bracket completely. And then it's taking the 5% bracket down over the next 4 years down to 4%. And I think the total cost on that is roughly right now estimated to be $611 million. And we've already gone through kind of 1 year of that. But so it's probably got another $450, $500 million to go on that. And so you'll be over the next 4 years, most likely reducing our income number down. And I've got the chart right after the pie charts is a bar chart. That shows you the mix of our funds. And so, income tax in 2023 going to the general fund was above 30%. And so that number will presumably come down as you start eliminating income tax. Now, sales tax has been really, really strong. There are some theories that as you give people more income, they will spend more on things that you charge sales tax on. And so I don't know that it will reduce the general fund by that exact amount. We're not economists and we haven't tried to compute what that might generate in sales tax. But as you reduce the income tax, theoretically, your sales tax will generate a little bit more. It's not going to be as much as the income tax.
Well, I would just ask you to share the information that you provided to me a few days ago that I thought was very helpful. And I think if I remember correctly, the annual reduction to the general fund in 2 years will be $453 million less than it is today, based on the phase-in of those 2 tax cuts.
I certainly would be happy to share that with the committee.
Okay, thank you.
So right now, we eliminated the 4% bracket last calendar year. This calendar year, our top rate will be 4.7% on the state income, and then the next year, 4.4, and the next year, 4.
Yes, sir. That's
Okay.
correct.
All right.
And we've got estimates for what each of those would cost in today's dollars. We haven't tried to inflate it, put inflation numbers on it or anything like that.
Okay. All right. Any other questions from the Senator Filligan for a question?
So as far as adding auditors, we have not made the progress we want to make on adding auditors. If you keep up with any of the national news, the national news has reported that there's a shortage of accountants and auditors. We've experienced that. And so we have really beefed up our recruiting efforts, and we're not where we want to be with auditors, but the additional money that you all have given us through the appropriations process primarily has helped us. But the other thing that's really helped us is SEC Squared. I don't know what kind of feedback you all receive from SEC Squared, but SEC Squared really gives us more flexibility to try to bring people closer to what SPB says the market rate for those people should be. We're not there yet on our pay, but the money that you all have given us has helped us move in that direction. And so it's been very helpful. We have recruited very hard and will continue to do so. But we have lots of folks who are retirement age and lots of folks who are going other places to do other things. And so we've experienced the same type of turnover a lot of other industries have. I don't think I've looked at that number. Our collections have grown to historic amounts. So on a revenue collection side, we have collected more than we have in any other time past. Our audit assessments are down a little bit because we don't have quite as many auditors doing audits, but our collections have not suffered as a result of that yet. And so I would say, I hadn't looked at the number to see the total number that's owed to the state. I could certainly take a look at that and try to get back with you on it. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Thank you. Senator Kirby for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A while ago, you were talking about the ABC warehouse. Haven't we given like $55 million, I think, maybe for that? And how much more money do you think you will need? Do you have any idea yet?
The number that we proposed last year was, I think, 95 million is what we said last year. We're kind of in the final stages of an updated budget along with the actual material handling equipment we would like to put in the warehouse. And I'm anticipating it will be in that range, give or take several million.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right. Senator Jordan for a question.
If I'm understanding the process right, the bottom line is to try to eliminate sales tax. That's where we are. That's what we're trying to do. We're reducing it annually. Is that what we're doing?
I think the bill that you all passed I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
It's the income tax, Senator, not sales tax.
Income tax.
Yeah.
Well, personal income tax. You're doing it so much each year until you get it down to where we want it.
The current bill that you all passed 2 sessions ago require us to reduce the top rate from 5% down to 4%. And that's after eliminating several years ago the 3%, and then we've eliminated the 4% bracket as well. So the first $10,000 plus some personal exemptions and standard deductions are not taxed at all. And then anything over that amount currently is 4.7%.
Okay. So we're still going down with it. That's
The bill requires us to go all the way down to 4% over the next 3 years.
okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Horn for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, a few years ago, we did a tax amnesty for taxpayers who were delinquent on having paid their taxes. And as I recall, we were able to generate money that we would not have otherwise seen by that program. Have you guys given any thought to reinstituting that?
We've had some discussions, but we haven't put any real thought to actually doing it. And that's certainly something we'll revisit again this year and take a look at. And I don't recall, I've looked at it before, but I don't recall the results of it was before my time, and I don't recall when it was, but I don't remember off the top of my head what the results were.
If I recall, it was something like a realization of over $40 million that we wouldn't have otherwise seen.
Yes, sir. We'll certainly take a look at that. Yes, sir.
So I don't see anything about the lottery in your figures. What's going on with that?
So we don't, that's another That's another provision that came out of your special session in 2018. We don't collect, so there are several things we don't collect, like the Medicaid bed tax assessments that are done. Medicaid handles those. The lottery is another good example of something that we don't collect. We don't have any involvement in collecting. So the lottery collects that and remits it to the state. And I always get the two confused. The first 80 million goes to education, transportation. I always get them.
Transportation, the rest goes to E
And
EEO.
anything over 80 million goes to transportation. I think it was 121 million is what they closed the fiscal year, if I'm not mistaken. So they are putting money in directly in transportation and education, and that's not included in any of these figures either. But I think that they have done well, and they've operated that program very well.
Yeah, and as I look at one of your pie charts, on the yeah, the sales tax is really driving our general fund budget, if it looks like to me.
Sales tax has been really big, but corporate income tax has been really big too. We collected over $1 billion in corporate income tax last year, which is just unheard of in recent years in Mississippi. So corporate income tax has really filled some of the extra money that we weren't anticipating to come in, but sales tax has been very strong. And the one thing, I'm sorry, Senator Horn, I didn't mean to interrupt you. The one thing that this doesn't show is the total amount we collected for sales tax is actually on the next page. We collected $4 billion in sales tax. Y'all just have us sending only 2.7 million of that to the general fund. So a lot of that's going out to education, it's going out to municipalities. And so it's being diverted out of the general fund. And so sales tax has been really, really strong. And same thing with use tax. Use tax is very similar to sales tax, but use tax has been very strong. But that's mostly been driven by marketplace facilitator more than anything.
You think that internet sales has had a big impact on that?
Internet sales on the use tax? Absolutely. Yes, sir. Huge impact. I think most of the growth that you have seen has probably been through some type of internet sale. So it's gone from 300 million to 800 million. And I would venture a guess that a lot of that is internet sales.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no further questions, thank you, Commissioner, for spending some time. I'm sure we'll have you back for some other committee meetings, and you and Jan and your team. Thank y'all for your responsiveness and for the information. Seeing no further questions, Senator Johnson for motion. Motion is rise and report. All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Dean.